Snowflakes drifted over Brooklyn Bridge, glowing under the amber lights. Grace Turner's breath formed white clouds as she ran, the city trembling beneath December's wind. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. The name on the screen made her chest tighten. Nathan Cole, her ex-husband. The man who'd ruined her reputation, taken her job, and now wanted to take her daughter. She stopped mid-step, staring at the icy East River. For a moment, her reflection wavered, a woman holding herself together by threads. She answered, "Grace." Nathan's voice slid through the line, smooth as ever. "I'm filing for full custody. Emma doesn't belong in your world anymore. Too unstable. Too emotional. You'll hear from my lawyers." The call ended. Grace stood frozen. Behind her, taxis honked. A siren wailed somewhere near the Manhattan Bridge, but she heard nothing. Only the echo of his words, too emotional. The same phrase he'd used the night he left her. She shoved her phone into her coat pocket, started walking again, faster this time. Her boots splashed through melting snow, but she didn't feel the cold. Her daughter, Emma, 7 years old, gentle, curious, would never understand why her father suddenly wanted to protect her from her own mother. Grace had fought through every humiliation after the divorce. Nathan's PR team painted her as unstable. Tabloids called her the gold digger who cracked. She lost her job at Cole Media when rumors spread she'd leaked company secrets, a lie Nathan himself had fed the press. She rebuilt quietly, doing freelance PR, living paycheck to paycheck in a small Brooklyn apartment, counting coins before Christmas, promising Emma that Santa would still come. Tonight, that promise felt like ash. Her phone buzzed again, a new message. Unknown number. "If you want the truth, meet me, Park Avenue, Suite 2701. Grace frowned. No name. No clue. But something about the timing, seconds after Nathan's call, made her pulse race. Her instincts screamed trap. Yet the other part of her, the mother who'd been cornered too long, whispered, "What if it's the one chance to expose him?" She looked toward the skyline, steel and glass glowing like frozen fire. Somewhere beyond that light was the man who thought she'd stay quiet forever. Grace tightened her scarf, crossed the street, and hailed a cab. The driver glanced at her through the mirror. "Rough night, miss?" She nodded, whispering, "Not for long." As the cab sped toward Park Avenue, she glanced at Emma's photo on her lock screen, the little girl smiling beside a half-built Christmas tree. Grace whispered to herself, "For you, baby. For the last time. I'm not running." Outside, the city glistened, unaware that tonight, a war of truth was beginning. And by Christmas Eve, one innocent question would destroy a man who thought he was untouchable. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing a lobby washed in warm gold. Grace stepped out, her boots leaving faint trails of melted snow on the marble floor. The sign read, "Hart Capital, Suite 2701. She hesitated. She hadn't heard that name in years. But before she could turn back, the door opened. "Grace Turner?" a deep, steady voice asked. She froze. Standing before her was Julian Hart, tall, impeccably dressed, his dark coat draped over one arm. His face was familiar yet sharper than memory. They'd gone to college together, back when Grace was studying communications, and he was the quiet genius who built tech startups from dorm rooms. She hadn't seen him in over a decade. "Julian," she whispered. "What are you?" He gestured her inside. "We should talk somewhere private." 1. The office looked like something out of a finance magazine, glass walls overlooking Park Avenue, soft jazz humming in the background, the faint scent of espresso in the air. A Mont Blanc pen rested beside an open MacBook, glowing with spreadsheets she couldn't begin to understand. "Before you ask," Julian began, "I didn't reach out for business. I reached out because I saw your name on a legal document that crossed my desk this morning." Grace's stomach dropped. "Nathan's case." "Laugh." He nodded slowly. "My firm invests in Cole Media. When I saw the custody suit attached to his financial filings, something felt off." "You don't deserve this, Grace." She scoffed. "You don't even know the half of it." Julian leaned forward, eyes steady. "Then tell me." So she did. She told him about the marriage that fell apart when Nathan began his affair with his assistant. How, after she left, he'd weaponized the media, whispering lies until she couldn't find a single company willing to hire her. She told him about Emma, how her daughter still asked, "Why doesn't Daddy come home for Christmas?" Julian listened without interrupting. When she finished, he exhaled quietly. "I believe you," he said simply. "And I can prove Nathan's been lying." Grace blinked. "What do you mean?" He opened his laptop and turned it toward her. Dozens of documents filled the screen: emails, payment logs, PR drafts. "I had my analysts look into Cole Media's internal correspondence," Julian continued. "Nathan approved a private fund labeled Custody Management Strategy. It's paying for fake social media accounts, online smear campaigns, and even certain press favors." Grace stared, speechless. It was worse than she'd imagined. Julian's voice softened. "He's trying to destroy your credibility before the hearing. But he made a mistake. He used corporate money for personal gain. That's illegal." Grace's hands trembled. "Why are you helping me, Julian? We barely knew each other." He smiled faintly. "You once stood up for me when a professor accused me of cheating. You told him I was the only one who didn't need to. I never forgot that." Grace looked away, blinking back tears. The kindness hit harder than she expected. Julian rose, walked to the window, overlooking the glittering city. Nathan built his empire on manipulation. Men like him always believe they're untouchable until someone smarter walks in. He turned to her, his tone calm but fierce. "Let me help you walk in." Grace exhaled shakily. "What do I have to do?" "Nothing yet," he replied. "I'll handle the legal side. You just stay quiet. Be patient. Let him trap himself." She hesitated, torn between fear and relief. "And if he finds out?" Julian gave a small, knowing smile. "Then he'll finally realize he picked the wrong woman to underestimate." Outside, the city pulsed with Christmas lights. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang 9 times. Grace watched the skyline through the glass, a reflection of herself standing taller than she had in years. For the first time since her marriage fell apart, she felt the faint spark of control returning. And as she left the office, Julian's last words echoed behind her. "By Christmas Eve, he'll wish he never made you his enemy." The next morning, the world looked deceptively peaceful. Snow layered the sidewalks, and Manhattan shimmered like a postcard. Grace woke early, packing Emma's lunch while the coffee machine hissed. The radio hummed with Christmas jingles, yet her mind pulsed with Julian's words from the night before. She tried to smile as Emma skipped into the kitchen, her tiny slippers shaped like reindeer. "Mommy, Daddy texted me." Grace froze, the butter knife still in her hand. "He did?" Emma nodded, holding out her iPad. On the screen was a message from Nathan. "Check the delivery box outside. Daddy sent you something special." Outside the apartment door sat a small, perfectly wrapped package, white ribbon, blue box, unmistakably Tiffany & Co. Grace's heart stuttered. She hadn't seen that brand since the early days of their marriage, when Nathan used luxury gifts to buy silence after his betrayals. "Can I open it?" Emma asked, eyes wide with excitement. Grace forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's see what Daddy sent." Inside was a delicate silver locket shaped like a snowflake. It gleamed under the kitchen light, almost too beautiful. Grace flipped it open. On one side was a photo of Nathan and Emma. On the other, an engraving, "Always close to my heart." But something about it felt wrong. Too perfect. Too sudden. That afternoon, as Emma napped, Grace couldn't stop thinking about the locket. She placed it on her desk beside her laptop, its surface reflecting the light oddly. She picked up her phone and called Julian. "Julian, can you check something for me?" He heard the tremor in her voice. "What's wrong?" She explained about the gift, the engraving, the eerie timing. Julian listened quietly, then said, "Don't panic. Just bring it to my office, now." When she arrived, Julian was already waiting with a slim black case on his desk. He carefully examined the locket under a magnifying glass, then pried open the hinge with a fine tool. A faint electronic click filled the air. Inside, behind the photo, was a tiny microchip. Grace felt her knees weaken. "Is that what I think it is?" Julian nodded grimly. "A GPS tracker, possibly an audio transmitter. He's been spying on you, or worse, on Emma." Grace pressed her hand to her mouth. "Oh my God." Julian looked at her, eyes burning. "This isn't just about custody anymore. He's collecting data, probably to twist your words, your daily routine, anything he can use in court. Her anger rose like fire through her veins. He put a tracking device in our daughter's necklace. How sick is that? Julian closed the case, his tone turning strategic. Good news is now we have proof. This could ruin him legally if we handle it right. But we can't let him know we found it. Act normal. Let him think you're still in the dark. Grace swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. And what about Emma? She wears it every day. Julian hesitated, then said softly, "We'll make a duplicate. My team can replace the chip with a harmless shell. He'll keep listening to nothing but static." That night, Grace lay awake beside Emma, watching the small snowflake pendant glimmer faintly in the dark. The irony wasn't lost on her. Nathan used to call her his lucky charm. Now he'd turned luck into a weapon. She turned her gaze toward the window, where the city lights flickered like restless stars. Somewhere out there, Nathan probably sat in his penthouse, smug, and certain she'd never fight back. Grace whispered into the quiet, "You'll regret underestimating me." The next morning, she met Julian's assistant, who replaced the microchip. Grace handed Emma the fake locket with a smile that hid steel beneath it. Because now, for the first time, she had something Nathan didn't, a secret he didn't know she knew. 3 days later, Grace's world turned upside down again. She was on her way to drop Emma off at school when her phone exploded with notifications, hundreds of them. Her name was trending on social media. She opened one headline and felt her stomach twist. Grace Turner spirals, ex-wife of media mogul, seen drinking alone, neglecting child. Beneath it was a photo, grainy, taken from across the street, showing her sitting at a small cafe with a glass of wine. It looked damning, except that the wine had been cranberry juice, and she'd been waiting for a client. Grace's phone rang. It was her boss. "Grace, maybe take a week off. This publicity is complicated." Complicated. The polite corporate word for toxic. By the time she reached home, reporters were waiting outside her building. Microphones flashed. Cameras clicked. "Grace, do you have a comment about the video?" one shouted. "What video?" she asked, but her voice was drowned out. Then her phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. "Maybe next time you'll think before trying to fight me. Merry Christmas. Nathan." Grace's blood turned to ice. She locked the door behind her and grabbed her laptop. Within minutes, she was on a video call with Julian. His expression hardened as he read the headlines. "He moved faster than I expected," he said quietly. "He's using the same PR firms that handled celebrity scandals. They'll flood the internet with fake narratives until people believe them." Grace clenched her jaw. "He's using Emma against me. He wants me to lose control." Julian nodded. "That's his weapon, perception. He knows courtrooms are swayed by image." He took a deep breath. "We'll counter with facts. My team already traced the metadata on that photo. It was uploaded by a bot account linked to a Cole Media server." Grace blinked. "He's sabotaging me with company resources again." Julian gave a small smile, the kind that promised retaliation. "Yes, and that's exactly how we'll bury him." Still, the damage spread faster than either of them could stop it. That evening, Grace picked up Emma from school, only to see two mothers whispering by the gate. Emma waved happily, but one woman pulled her child closer, murmuring something Grace couldn't hear. Inside the car, Emma asked softly, "Mommy, why are people saying bad things about you on Daddy's news?" Grace's heart shattered. She forced a smile. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, people tell stories they don't understand. But you and I know the truth." Emma nodded and hugged her from the back seat. "I believe you." At home, Grace poured herself coffee and stared out the window. The city was dressed in holiday lights, yet her world felt darker than ever. Julian called again that night. "We'll get ahead of this," he said, "but you need to stay calm. Every word you say online could be twisted." Grace exhaled slowly. "Then we'll stay quiet. Let him think I'm breaking." Julian's tone softened. "You're stronger than he remembers." "Len." She looked at Emma sleeping on the couch, wrapped in a fuzzy blanket, clutching her teddy bear. "I have to be," she whispered. Hours later, as the city slept, Grace sat by the window scrolling through endless hate comments, strangers calling her unfit, unstable, unworthy. But beneath the shame, something new was forming. Resolve. Nathan had drawn first blood. But he didn't realize he'd awakened the part of her that once built his empire from scratch, the strategist, the communicator, the woman who knew how to spin truth sharper than any lie. Grace closed her laptop, the faintest smile curling her lips. "Your move, Nathan," she whispered. "And it's the last one you'll ever make." Snow had started to fall again by the weekend, quiet and relentless, muffling the city's noise. Grace sat at her kitchen table, a steaming mug of coffee beside her, the Tiffany box glinting faintly under the morning light. Emma was still asleep, her little snores echoing softly from the bedroom. The apartment felt peaceful, too peaceful, almost like the calm before another storm. Julian's text arrived at 7:45 a.m. sharp. "I need you to come to my office. Urgent. Bring nothing that can be tracked." Grace felt a shiver crawl down her spine. She left her phone on airplane mode, packed Emma's backpack for school, and took the subway instead of a cab. By the time she reached Hart Capital, the air smelled of rain and fear. Julian was waiting for her in his office, sleeves rolled up, eyes dark from lack of sleep. A red folder sat on his desk. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. Grace sat down slowly. "What kind?" He opened the folder and slid a stack of papers toward her, copies of emails, financial records, and a court petition stamped with her name. "This," Julian said, "is Nathan's next move." Grace flipped through the documents, her pulse spiked. The petition accused her of mental instability, referencing medical records from a private clinic she'd never even visited. Attached were fabricated therapist notes suggesting she'd had violent episodes. Grace's voice broke. "He forged medical files?" Julian nodded grimly. "And he leaked them anonymously to a journalist. They'll hit the tabloids by Monday." Grace covered her face with her hands, shaking. "He's trying to make me look dangerous. If the judge sees this—" "He won't," Julian interrupted firmly. "Because we're going to stop him first." He turned his laptop toward her. On the screen was a map of IP addresses, data streams, and timestamps. "My cybersecurity team traced the fake documents to a VPN connection linked to Cole Media's internal server. Nathan's personal assistant uploaded them from her office computer at 9:42 p.m., Thursday." Grace blinked through tears. "You can prove that?" "Yes," Julian said. "But we can't leak it ourselves. We need to make it official. That means a legal counterstrike, one that exposes his criminal use of company assets." Grace swallowed, still trembling. "You're saying—" "Turn his game against him." Julian gave a small, approving nod. "Exactly. But we'll need something stronger. Something personal." Grace stared at the folder. "He used to keep all his private files on a hard drive in his home office," she said quietly. "He called it the vault. If those records are still there might be proof of everything." Julian leaned forward. "Are you sure?" "I was married to the man," Grace said bitterly. "He doesn't delete anything. He hoards secrets." Julian smiled slightly. "Then we find the vault." The plan was reckless, maybe even illegal. But Grace had reached the point where fear no longer controlled her. She wasn't the desperate ex-wife anymore. She was a woman reclaiming her narrative. That night, as Emma slept, Grace dug through an old drawer and found Nathan's business card, the one embossed with gold, still smelling faintly of his cologne. On the back, she'd scribbled his old home address in the Hamptons. Julian's message buzzed in. "If you're serious, we leave tomorrow night, quietly." Grace stared at the address, her heart thudding. Snow drifted past her window, and the reflection staring back at her wasn't the broken woman Nathan had tried to destroy. It was someone new. Someone dangerous. She whispered to herself, "You wanted a war, Nathan. You just got one." The Hamptons were buried under a blanket of snow, white and silent, like the world had been erased. The drive from Manhattan took nearly 3 hours, the roads slick and empty. Grace sat in the passenger seat of Julian's black Mercedes, her fingers wrapped tightly around a thermos of coffee. Neither of them had spoken much since leaving the city. At last, Julian broke the silence. "You don't have to do this. I can send someone in my place." Grace shook her head, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. "No. He took everything from me, my name, my job, my peace. I need to see how far he's gone with my own eyes." The car turned off the main road and onto a long driveway lined with frozen trees. At the end stood Nathan's summer estate, a sprawling glass and stone mansion that gleamed under the moonlight like a fortress. Grace remembered it all, the parties, the laughter, the way she'd once felt small inside those walls. Tonight, she wasn't small. Julian parked behind a row of bushes near the gate. He handed her a pair of black gloves. "Security cameras loop every 60 seconds, he said. "My guy set it up remotely. We'll have a short window to move." Grace nodded. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. They slipped through the side gate, footprints disappearing beneath the falling snow. The only sound was the wind off the Atlantic and the rhythmic crunch of boots. Grace led him around the back, toward a glass door that opened into Nathan's home office. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and old money. The walls were lined with framed magazine covers: Business Weekly, Forbes, The New Yorker. Nathan's face smiled back at her from every one of them. The perfect American success story. Grace whispered, "The vault's behind that painting, the city skyline." Julian crossed the room and examined the massive frame. "Combination?" Grace hesitated, then smiled bitterly. "Our anniversary. He's that predictable." Julian entered the numbers. The wall clicked open, revealing a steel safe glowing faintly under LED light. Inside were folders, hard drives, and several USB sticks labeled with single words: contracts, clients, family. Grace reached for the one marked family. Julian plugged it into his encrypted laptop. Files filled the screen: photos, recordings, text logs. Then Grace saw it. A folder named Therapy, Grace Turner. She clicked it open. Dozens of fake reports appeared, the same ones Nathan had leaked to the press, along with an audio file. Julian pressed play. Nathan's voice filled the room. "If we make her look unstable, the court will fold. I'll take the kid and clean my image before Q4 earnings. Easy win." Grace's breath caught. The other voice, his assistant, laughed softly. "You're ruthless." Nathan replied, "That's why I win." Julian looked at her. "We got him." "Won." Grace felt a mix of fury and relief surge through her. "Let's copy everything and go." But just as Julian began the download, the house lights flickered, then footsteps echoed from the hallway. Grace froze. Someone was there. Julian whispered, "Security." A flashlight beam sliced through the darkness. Grace's pulse thundered. She ducked behind the desk, gripping Julian's arm. The guard's voice crackled over his radio. Motion sensor tripped near the study. "Checking now." 1. The seconds dragged like hours. The guard stepped into the office, sweeping his light across the room. It landed on the open vault. Grace's mind screamed. But before he could react, Julian tossed a small device toward the light, a smoke jammer. The room filled with a sharp hiss and blinding white fog. "Run!" he shouted. They bolted out the back, slipping through the snow as alarms blared behind them. Grace clutched the USB to her chest. When they reached the car, she turned to see the mansion's lights flashing red and blue. Julian hit the gas, tires skidding against the ice, breathing hard. Grace looked out at the receding house and whispered, "You wanted proof, Nathan. Now, I have your confession." Julian glanced at her, his mouth curling into a grin. "And by Christmas Eve, the whole world will too." The following morning, the city looked untouched by the chaos that had unfolded in the Hamptons. But Grace and Julian knew better. The USB drive sat between them on the table inside Julian's Park Avenue office, a small silver stick that could bring down an empire. Julian's head of security, a calm, gray-haired man named Marcus, entered with 2 coffees. "I checked the news," he said. "No police reports from the estate yet. Looks like the smoke jammer bought us time." Grace exhaled. "Good. The last thing we need is Nathan finding out we were there." "How?" Julian opened his laptop, inserted the USB, and began decrypting the files. Lines of data flashed across the screen. "If this audio holds up in court," he murmured, "it's not just custody he'll lose. He'll be facing charges for fraud, surveillance, and defamation." Grace folded her arms tightly, her pulse racing. "He deserves worse." Julian glanced at her, his tone softer. "And he'll get exactly what he's earned. But we do this right. No leaks, no rage. We let the truth speak clean and surgical." Grace tried to focus on his words, but exhaustion hit her like a wave. 2 hours of sleep in 48 hours, the constant fear of being caught at all pressed down on her chest. Marcus looked at her kindly. You should rest, Miss Turner. You're no good to anyone if you collapse. Grace gave a tired laugh. Rest? Not until he's finished. Before Julian could reply, his phone buzzed. He frowned as he read the message. It's from my contact at the Department of Justice, he said slowly. Nathan's company just filed a restraining order against you, claiming you broke into private property. Grace's blood ran cold. He knows. Julian's jaw tightened. Someone tipped him off. Marcus cursed under his breath. You have a leak, Julian. Julian stood, pacing. Only 5 people knew about the Hamptons trip. You, me, my tech, and... He stopped. Grace's voice was sharp. And who? Julian hesitated. Mia, my assistant. She's been handling all my scheduling, including your meeting times. Grace's stomach dropped. Mia. The same woman who used to work under Nathan at Cole Media. Marcus nodded grimly. That's your mole. Julian grabbed his coat. I'll handle it. Grace stopped him. No. Let me talk to her. An hour later they met Mia at a Kiat cafe near Bryant Park. She looked nervous, stirring her lat too quickly. Julian, Grace, what's going on? Grace sat across from her, eyes steady. You told Nathan we went to his house. Mia's hand froze. I what? No. Julian placed his phone on the table, screen lit. A message thread appeared, encrypted texts between Mia and a number labeled NC. Grace's voice didn't rise. It dropped to something colder. You betrayed me for him. Mia's eyes filled with tears. He said he'd ruin me if I didn't cooperate. He already owns half my debt, Julian. I didn't mean for you to get caught. Grace stood. You don't get to mean well when a child's future is at stake. Julian reached over, calm but firm. We're not here for revenge, Mia. We just need you to fix it. Mia hesitated. How? Julian leaned closer. Nathan's team will move fast to delete evidence. We need your credentials, remote access to his internal PR servers. You do that, and we protect you legally. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she nodded. Okay. Okay. I'll do it. No. Grace didn't thank her. She just walked out into the cold. Snow was falling again, softer now, blanketing Park Avenue in white silence. She tilted her head to the sky, feeling a snowflake melt against her cheek. Julian joined her a moment later, slipping a hand into his coat pocket. You okay? Grace's lips trembled, but her eyes were steady. He wants to play God with people's lives, Julian. But even gods fall. Julian looked at her tired, furious, unbreakable, and said, Then let's make sure he does. Behind them, the cafe lights flickered, and the storm outside began to grow. The next 48 hours unfolded like a movie Grace hadn't agreed to star in. Mia, true to her word, provided remote credentials into Cole Media's internal PR server. Julian's tech team moved quickly, pulling archived communications between Nathan and his crisis management firm. The deeper they went, the uglier it got. Grace sat beside Julian in his office, hands trembling as messages appeared on the screen, Nathan's digital fingerprints all over them. One email was marked confidential, image recovery plan. Inside, a thread between Nathan and his PR director outlined how to reshape public sympathy before the custody hearing. Nathan wrote, She'll break. The internet will finish her before court even starts. Grace read the words twice. The cruelty was casual, confident the same way he'd spoken to her during their marriage, as though she were a chess piece, not a person. Julian looked at her. This is enough to sink him. Grace shook her head. Not yet. People like Nathan don't fall because of what they did. They fall because the world watches them do it. That same night, a new scandal exploded online. Only this time, the target wasn't Grace. It was Nathan. Someone in Grace knew exactly who had leaked a snippet of the audio recording they'd recovered from the vault. In it, Nathan's voice could be heard saying, If we make her look unstable, the court will fold. The clip went viral in under an hour. Hashtags lit up across social media. Number Justice for Grace. Number Cole the Manipulator. Number Liar in a Suit. By morning, every news outlet in New York was calling. Cole Media's stock dipped 11% before noon. Nathan responded with predictable arrogance, holding a press conference outside his Fifth Avenue headquarters. "Those recordings are taken out of context," he said, his jaw tight, his smile forced. "This is a coordinated smear campaign from my ex-wife and her associates." Grace watched it live on her laptop, sitting in her apartment with Emma playing in the background, when a reporter shouted, "Mr. Cole, are you saying the recording is fake?" Nathan's smirk widened. "I'm saying," he replied smoothly, "that some people will do anything for attention." The arrogance almost made her laugh. An hour later, Julian called. "He just signed his own destruction," he said. "He denied authenticity on national TV, which means if we present the full recording to the court, that's perjury and defamation in one move." Grace leaned back, finally allowing herself to breathe. "Then let's make it official." But even victory came with shadows. That night, after she tucked Emma into bed, Grace stepped out to the balcony, the Manhattan skyline flickering like 1,000 tiny fires. Her phone buzzed an email from an unknown sender. Subject: "You think you've won?" Attached was a photo Emma at school, taken that morning. Grace's stomach dropped. Her hands shook as she scrolled. Another message followed. "Nice daughter. Shame if she disappeared before Christmas." Her vision blurred. "No," she whispered. "Not my child." "When?" She called Julian immediately. His voice turned sharp and professional. "Pack a bag. You're coming here now. I'll handle security." By midnight, Grace and Emma were inside Julian's penthouse floor-to-ceiling glass, quiet hum of city lights below. Marcus posted 2 men outside the door. Grace sat on the couch, holding Emma's hand as she slept. Julian knelt beside her. "This is him lashing out. He's scared. That means we're close." Grace stared at him, her voice trembling but fierce. "If he touches her, I'll burn everything he owns." Julian nodded. "Then we won't let him get close. Tomorrow, we go to the DA. We hand over everything, the emails, the audio, the financials. After that, it's out of his hands." Grace looked out the window again, snow drifting across the skyline. "He's already lost," she murmured. "He just doesn't know it yet." Julian followed her gaze. "Then let's make sure Christmas Eve is the night he finally does." Lack. The next 48 hours turned New York City into a pressure cooker. The storm wasn't outside, it was on every screen, every phone, every whisper downtown. Grace and Julian had officially handed the evidence to the Manhattan District Attorney. The system was moving, and Nathan Cole's empire was beginning to rot from the inside. By Monday morning, the press had their scent. Cole Media's logo flashed across CNN, CNBC, and every gossip site on the internet. Words like fraud, surveillance, manipulation, and custody corruption filled the headlines. Grace watched from Julian's penthouse, holding a mug she couldn't bring herself to drink from. Julian stood behind her, reading from his iPad. "They're saying the company could lose $70 million in market value by Friday." Grace barely blinked. "Good. Let him feel something for once." Nathan, ever the narcissist, tried to fight back. At 10 a.m., he walked out of his Fifth Avenue townhouse in a tailored charcoal suit, flashing that same TV smile that had fooled half of America. Dozens of cameras clicked. "These rumors are baseless," he declared. "My ex-wife and her business partner fabricated everything for attention." Julian laughed under his breath. "Business partner, huh?" Grace crossed her arms. "He's trying to smear us as a scandal. He thinks people still buy his charm. But charm couldn't erase truth." By noon, the DA's office had leaked the official charges: corporate fraud, wiretapping, falsifying medical records, and attempted witness intimidation. Nathan's arrest warrant hit social media before the ink was dry. Cole Media's stock nosedived. Board members resigned. Advertisers pulled contracts. One viral tweet read, "Funny how the man who claimed to empower truth got caught lying for a living." Julian turned to her. "You wanted public accountability. You got it." Still, victory didn't feel clean. Grace felt her chest tighten when she thought of Emma, how she'd someday read about all of this. The world now knew her mother's pain in headlines. But then she remembered what Julian had said the night they met again. Let the truth speak clean and surgical. That afternoon, Nathan made his last desperate move. He released a statement claiming the recordings were AI fabricated, that Grace and Julian were extorting him. But within minutes, tech analysts debunked his claim. The recording's metadata confirmed authenticity. He'd trapped himself with his own arrogance. By evening, Grace stood near the window as police lights flickered outside Cole Media headquarters. Crowds gathered, phones raised. When Nathan finally emerged, escorted by 2 NYPD officers, his designer coat looked out of place against the snow. Cameras flashed, voices shouted. "Mr. Cole, did you fake your wife's records? Do you regret framing her? Is this the end of your career?" Nathan didn't answer. His jaw was tight, his eyes hollow. For the first time, Grace saw not the man who once owned her silence, but the coward behind the power. Julian turned on the TV. Every major network was broadcasting it live. Breaking news. Media CEO Nathan Cole arrested in corporate fraud scandal. Grace watched as Nathan was loaded into the black car, his face caught in 100 camera flashes. The world was finally seeing what she'd always known. Beneath the luxury suits and perfect smile was rot. When it was over, Julian poured her a glass of wine. "You did it," he said quietly. Grace stared out at the city lights, a faint smile tugging her lips. "No, he did it. He just needed help pressing play." Julian chuckled. "So what now?" Grace turned toward him, eyes softer now. "Now I breathe." Outside, snow drifted past the glass like confetti. For the first time, the city didn't feel cruel. It felt like justice. Christmas Eve arrived like a sigh after a long war. The city glowed with quiet wonder. Fifth Avenue dressed in gold. Central Park buried beneath white silence. Inside the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, a charity gala glittered under crystal chandeliers. Grace Turner, for the first time in years, walked into a room without fear trailing behind her. She wore a simple black velvet gown. Elegant, understated, powerful. The kind of grace Nathan used to claim he'd created in her. Tonight, she owned it. Julian escorted her through the crowd, his arm light around her waist, both of them greeted by the kind of respectful silence reserved for survivors who'd already won. News of Nathan's arrest had dominated every network for a week. His companies were collapsing, his assets frozen, and his reputation in ashes. The once untouchable CEO was now awaiting trial at Rikers, denied bail. For the first time in a decade, Grace could breathe. As the orchestra played, Emma twirled nearby in a small red dress, her laughter echoing like bells. She looked up at the giant Christmas tree and whispered, "Mommy, it's prettier than the one Daddy used to have." Grace smiled softly. "That's because this one's real, sweetheart." Julian raised his glass, his eyes warm. "You did it, Grace. You turned every weapon he used against you into truth." Grace looked at him, her voice steady but full. "I didn't want revenge, Julian. I just wanted peace." He smiled. Sometimes peace looks a lot like justice, but the night wasn't done with her yet. As the gala host took the stage to thank donors, a journalist approached, microphone in hand. "Miss Turner," she said gently, "you've become a symbol of resilience this Christmas. Do you have anything to say to the women watching you tonight?" The room fell silent. Grace felt hundreds of eyes turn her way, the same kind of gaze that used to crush her. But now, it lifted her. She stepped toward the mic. "I don't know if I'm a symbol," she began softly, "but I know what it feels like to be silenced, to have your truth turned into entertainment. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: don't wait for someone to believe you. Speak, even if your voice shakes, because truth doesn't need permission." Applause rippled through the ballroom, slow, sincere, rising like a tide. Emma clapped the loudest, her little hands glowing in the light. Julian's eyes shone with something deeper than pride. When the crowd quieted, he stepped forward, holding a small velvet box. Grace blinked, caught off guard. "Grace Turner," he said, his voice low but steady. "You've spent years surviving storms. Let this be the start of calm seas. Will you marry me?" A gasp swept the room. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. For the first time in so long, her tears weren't born of fear, they were of gratitude. She laughed softly, trembling. "Julian, you really picked Christmas Eve?" He smiled. "It's when miracles happen." She nodded, unable to speak. "Yes." The crowd erupted in applause as Emma ran up, hugging them both. "Does that mean I get 2 stockings next Christmas?" She giggled. Julian laughed. "You'll get a whole new life, kiddo." Outside, Snow began to fall heavier, brushing against the glass windows like tiny blessings. The band shifted into silent night. Grace looked out at the city that had once broken her and now watched her rise. She whispered to herself, "Merry Christmas, New York. We made it." As the lights dimmed, Julian wrapped his arms around her. "To truth," he said. Grace rested her head against his chest. "To second chances, And somewhere beyond the ballroom walls, the city hummed with justice fulfilled and love reborn, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful revenge is simply living free. Christmas morning in New York was softer than Grace had ever seen it. The streets were still, the air sharp with cold, the world wrapped in quiet relief. For the first time in 7 years, she woke up without fear clutching her chest. Julian's penthouse was filled with the smell of cinnamon and coffee. Sunlight spilled through the glass, catching flakes of snow as they drifted past the windows. Emma was on the living room floor, surrounded by wrapping paper and half-opened gifts, humming to herself as she arranged her dolls. Grace leaned against the kitchen counter, holding a mug between her palms. Her reflection in the window startled her. She looked rested. Lighter. There were still scars in her eyes, but they no longer owned her. Julian came up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Hartwell," almost, he teased. She smiled faintly. "You don't waste time, do you? I've waited long enough." He kissed her shoulder, then gestured toward the table, where a small box wrapped in gold paper Saturday. One more gift. Grace opened it slowly. Inside was a simple silver bracelet engraved with the words, "You're free now." Her breath caught. "It's not a promise," Julian said softly. "It's a reminder." She nodded, blinking back tears. "You really think I'm free? I know you are. Nathan can't touch you anymore. The court finalized your custody this morning. You and Emma are safe." Grace sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "It's really over?" Julian crouched in front of her, his eyes steady. "It's over." She covered her face, laughing through tears. "For so long, I thought this day would never come." Julian smiled. "Justice takes its time. But when it arrives, it's absolute." Just then, Emma ran over, holding a crumpled envelope. "Mommy, this came in the mail. It has my name on it." Grace frowned. "Today?" Emma nodded eagerly. Grace took the envelope, tearing it open carefully. Inside was a Christmas card, no return address, just a simple line of handwriting that made her heart freeze. "I'm sorry, Pumpkin. I'll do better one day. Love, Daddy." Julian read over her shoulder, his expression unreadable. Grace set the card down slowly. The paper trembled in her hand. "He wrote this from jail." Emma looked up. "Is Daddy still bad?" Grace knelt, cupping her daughter's face. "He did bad things, honey. But maybe someday he'll learn what good means." Emma nodded solemnly, then hugged her tight. "I like it better here. It's warm." Grace laughed softly, pressing her cheek to Emma's hair. "So do I." After Emma ran back to her toys, Julian picked up the card and sighed. "He's trying to make peace." Grace shrugged. "Maybe, but peace isn't a gift, it's earned. And he's got a lifetime of work ahead." Julian smiled. "You could have said worse." She sipped her coffee, gazing out at the skyline. "I don't need to hate him anymore. That's his punishment." Julian took her hand. "And your reward?" Grace turned to him, her eyes soft. "This. A morning where I'm not scared. A home that feels like love. That's enough." He brushed a snowflake from her hair. "You know what I think?" "What?" He smiled. "I think you deserve more than enough." Grace laughed quietly, leaning in to kiss him. The world outside sparkled, the city alive again. Emma's giggles filled the air as she shouted, "Mommy, look, it's snowing again." Grace turned toward the window, watching flakes swirl like slow confetti. She whispered, almost to herself, "It's not just snow, baby. It's everything starting over." Udo. And in that quiet Christmas morning glow, surrounded by warmth, laughter, and love hard-earned through pain, Grace finally understood freedom wasn't the absence of fear. It was the courage to live fully after surviving it. The first week of January felt like a deep exhale. The city, still wrapped in frost, had traded its holiday sparkle for silence. Grace Turner, once the ghost of Cole Media's scandal, was now the face of survival. But even victories came with a price. Every morning, she woke to a flood of emails, interviews, book deals, a potential documentary from Netflix. People she hadn't heard from in years suddenly remembered her number. Everyone wanted a piece of the woman who had brought down a billionaire. Julian warned her to pace herself. "The world loves a redemption story," he said one night as they walked through Central Park. "But it loves watching a phoenix burn too." Grace smirked. "Then I'll stop catching fire." Fun. But inside she wasn't sure. Because with every article and podcast, the old memories clawed back. Nathan's voice, his hands slamming the counter, the years she'd spent believing she was worthless. The world had moved on, but trauma didn't obey the news cycle. The morning of January 6th, she met Elena Morales, the ADA, at a cafe near Wall Street. The trial date was set for March. Elena warned her, "The defense will go for character assassination. They'll drag every photo, every message, every past mistake." "Are you ready for that?" Grace stirred her coffee, the spoon trembling slightly. "I survived him. I can survive words." Elena smiled. "Good answer. But stay grounded. He'll use sympathy. He'll try to make you the villain again." Grace nodded, steady. "Let him try." The truth's louder now. Across the city, Nathan Cole was doing interviews from his holding cell. His lawyers had filed appeals, his PR team leaking exclusive letters where he claimed remorse. Tabloids published grainy photos of him holding a Bible, quoting forgiveness. Julian showed her one headline: "The Rise and Fall of Nathan Cole, from CEO to Prison Prophet." Grace rolled her eyes. "They're making him a martyr." Julian shrugged. "Only for a minute. Lies have shorter legs than truth." But it still stung. The man who'd nearly destroyed her was playing victim again, and the internet, fickle as ever, was already split between outrage and pity. That night, Grace sat alone in her living room, the glow of the city flickering through the glass. Emma was asleep, clutching her snow globe. Julian had flown to San Francisco for meetings. For the first time since the trial began, she felt the emptiness creep in the what now after the storm. Her phone buzzed. A new email. No sender. No subject. Just one line: "Truth has two edges, Grace." Attached was a photo her, Julian, and Emma leaving the courthouse. A red circle drawn around Julian's hand on her waist. Grace's breath caught. Someone was watching them. She forwarded the email to Marcus. His reply came fast. "We'll trace it. Probably an obsessed fan." But she knew better. The tone, the phrasing, it wasn't random. It was Nathan. The next morning, Elena confirmed it. Nathan's legal team had been denied appeal. He'd snapped during an interview, yelling about the conspiracy. Guards pulled him off camera. Grace stared at the footage in silence. The man who'd once ruled Manhattan was now pacing a concrete cell, eyes wild, shouting at ghosts only he could see. Julian returned that night, finding her on the balcony, bundled in his coat. "You okay?" he asked gently. Grace nodded, watching snow drift past the skyline. "He's unraveling." Julian's tone softened. "He's already gone. Don't let him live rent-free in your head." She smiled faintly. "He doesn't. But I need to remember who he was to never let that darkness near me again." Julian slipped his arms around her. "Then remember this instead. The woman who survived him. The mother who raised light from his shadow." Grace leaned into him, the city glowing beneath their feet. "Maybe peace isn't quiet," she whispered. "Maybe it's just learning to live without fear." Julian kissed her temple. "Then you're already there." And for the first time, she believed him. February arrived with gray skies and restless winds. Snow no longer sparkled it bit. The city was weary, and so was Grace. Though Nathan Cole sat behind bars, his shadow lingered in whispers, court filings, and unexpected headlines. Every few days, another exclusive surfaced: claims of corruption, twisted narratives, or insinuations that Grace had framed him. Julian told her to ignore them. But ignoring ghosts was harder than erasing them. One Friday morning, Grace was walking Emma to school when she noticed a black car idling at the corner. The driver's face was hidden behind dark glasses. When she turned to look again, the car sped off. Her pulse spiked. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe not. Later that day, she found a white envelope slid under her apartment door. No return address, just her name written in Nathan's sharp handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You may have won the courtroom, but I'll win the story. See you in March." Her fingers went numb. The trial. He was still finding ways to reach her. That night, she met Julian at his office, exhaustion pressing against her ribs. "He's taunting me," she said. "From jail." Julian's jaw tightened. "He can't contact you directly, it's illegal. But he's still manipulating through proxies. Probably his lawyers or someone loyal to him." "Nah." Grace paced the floor, her voice rising. "He doesn't stop. Even in a cell, he finds ways to invade my life." Julian reached for her hand. "Then we build stronger walls." The following week, Marcus arranged private security for Grace and Emma. Cameras were installed, routes monitored, calls screened. Yet deep inside, Grace knew Nathan's real weapon wasn't physical, it was psychological. He didn't need to touch her to make her doubt the peace she'd earned. As the trial approached, the media frenzy reignited. The courthouse steps turned into a circus of flashing lights and microphones. Protesters shouted for justice, while others screamed for mercy. Grace arrived with her head high, Julian at her side, cameras reflecting off their faces like sparks. Inside the courtroom, Nathan sat in his tailored prison suit, his arrogance dimmed but not gone. When he saw her, he smirked. It was small but sharp, a knife disguised as a smile. Grace's attorney, Elena Morales, opened with quiet precision. The defendant abused power, money, and media to destroy another person's life for his own gain. This case isn't about marriage, it's about manipulation. Grace sat still, every muscle tense. When her name was called to testify, she walked to the stand, the world shrinking to the sound of her heels against marble. She took a deep breath. "For years, I believed I was powerless," she began. "But the truth isn't something you can bury with money or fear. It survives." Nathan watched her, expression unreadable. But his hand twitched the smallest flicker of unease. During cross-examination, his lawyer tried to paint her as bitter, unstable, fame-hungry. Grace didn't flinch. When he asked, "Miss Turner, do you hate your ex-husband?" she met his gaze. "I don't hate him," she said softly. "I pity him." The courtroom went silent. That night, news outlets replayed her words across the country. Commentators called it the moment she buried him without raising her voice. Public opinion shifted entirely. Even those who once doubted her now called her brave. After the first week of testimony, Grace stood outside the courthouse watching the sunset. Julian wrapped his coat around her shoulders. "You turned the trial into something bigger," he said. "It's not about him anymore. It's about every woman who's been told to stay quiet." She exhaled, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Then let them hear me loud and clear." Julian smiled. "They already do." And though the trial wasn't over, Grace knew the ending was already written, not by Nathan, not by the media, but by truth finally standing on its own feet. The second week of the trial began under a heavy sky. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, their breath fogging in the cold air, waiting for the next spark of drama. Inside, Grace Turner sat at the plaintiff's table, hands clasped tightly, the weight of every headline pressing down on her. Nathan Cole entered moments later, escorted by guards but walking like he still owned the floor. He wore a charcoal suit, prison-pressed and crisp, his smirk faint but deliberate. When their eyes met, he mouthed a single word: checkmate. Julian leaned in. "Ignore him. He's bluffing." But Grace could feel it. Nathan had something planned. And she knew from experience that when he smiled, someone else bled. That morning's witness was Mia, the former assistant who had betrayed Grace and later helped bring Nathan down. She walked to the stand with trembling hands, her voice cracking at first. "I leaked information about Grace because I was scared," she said. "He threatened to ruin my career, my family. But I didn't know how far he'd go." The defense attorney circled like a shark. "So, Miss Diaz, you admit you were part of the smear campaign?" Mia nodded. "Yes, but I also helped uncover it." Nathan smirked, whispering to his lawyer. Grace knew the strategy: humiliate the witnesses, plant seeds of doubt. She'd seen him do it in business meetings, boardrooms, even in their marriage. But this time, the room wasn't his. Julian squeezed her hand under the table. Let him dig his own grave. By midday, the court recessed. Grace stepped into the hallway to catch her breath. Reporters swarmed like locusts, shouting questions. Grace, do you think Nathan deserves prison? Is it true you're marrying Julian Hart? She ignored them, pushing through the noise until she reached the courthouse balcony. Snow had started to fall again, soft and slow. The world outside looked peaceful, almost mocking the chaos inside. When court resumed, Nathan's attorney called him to the stand. The gallery buzzed. Nathan adjusted his tie, smiling faintly at the cameras. Mr. Cole, the lawyer began. Did you ever intend to harm your ex-wife? Nathan tilted his head, feigning sincerity. Absolutely not. I loved Grace. She was the mother of my child. Everything I did was to protect my family. Grace's jaw tightened. The performance was flawless. The lawyer nodded. And these accusations, fraud, defamation, surveillance, what do you say to those? Nathan smiled wider. I say she's rewriting history. I made mistakes, but I didn't destroy her. She destroyed herself. The audience gasped. Grace felt Julian's hand on her arm, grounding her. Then Elena Morales rose from the prosecution table. Your Honor, she said, her tone measured but sharp. We request permission to play an unreleased portion of the defendant's audio recording. The judge nodded. The courtroom dimmed as a voice filled the speaker's. Nathan's, unmistakable and cold. Let her break. She'll beg for attention. And I'll look like the hero who tried to save her. By the time she realizes it, she'll be nothing. Silence. Nathan's smile faltered. Elena looked at him. That was recorded in your office, Mr. Cole. Care to explain how that protects your family? Nathan stammered. That's taken out of context. Grace whispered. There's your checkmate. By the time the recording ended, the jury's faces were stone. Cameras flashed as reporters scribbled notes. The illusion Nathan had built for years shattered in seconds. When court adjourned, Grace walked past him without slowing. He reached out, his voice low. You think you've won? She paused, meeting his gaze one last time. I didn't need to win. You just needed to lose. Outside, snow fell heavier, blanketing the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted, but Grace didn't answer. She walked straight through the storm, Julian beside her. And for the first time, she didn't feel cold, because the truth no longer needed defending. It had already spoken for itself. The morning of the verdict dawned gray and still, like the city itself was holding its breath. Reporters filled the courthouse steps before sunrise, their cameras aimed at the front doors as snow flurried down. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Even the marble floors seemed to echo softer, out of respect for what was about to happen. Grace Turner sat beside Julian in the first row, her hands clasped tightly around a folded tissue. Her lawyer, Elena Morales, whispered, Whatever happens, remember you already reclaimed your life. Grace nodded, though her heart hammered in her chest. The trial had lasted 3 weeks. Every testimony, every document, every moment of truth had been laid bare. But after years of manipulation, it was hard to believe Nathan could truly be held accountable. Across the room, Nathan sat rigid, his once perfect posture now weighed down by exhaustion. His designer suit hung looser. He'd lost weight, sleep, and control, all things he'd once valued more than love. But still, that smirk lingered, faint and poisonous, like he believed he'd somehow find a loophole. The bailiff called for order as the jury filed in. 12 faces that had heard everything: his lies, her pain, their story. Grace held her breath. The judge's voice broke the silence. Has the jury reached a verdict? The forewoman stood, her voice clear. We have, Your Honor. She read the charges one by one. On the count of corporate fraud, guilty. Nathan's jaw tightened. On the count of illegal surveillance, guilty. Grace's heartbeat quickened. On the count of defamation and falsification of evidence, guilty. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Cameras flashed. Nathan blinked rapidly, his smirk finally breaking. The judge nodded gravely. Mr. Cole, you have been found guilty on all charges. Sentencing will be determined immediately. Elena squeezed Grace's shoulder. You did it. But Grace didn't speak. She couldn't. She just watched Nathan, her ex-husband, her tormentor, standing there, stripped of everything that made him powerful. When the judge pronounced the sentence 15 years in federal prison without parole, the room erupted. Some reporters shouted questions, others scribbled furiously. Nathan spun toward Grace, his voice sharp. "You think this makes you better than me? You'll always be nothing without me." For the first time, Grace met his rage with calm. "You're wrong," she said evenly. "I was nothing because of you. Now I'm finally me." Security pulled him away, his voice echoing down the hall until it disappeared into nothing. Outside, the world exploded in flashes and cheers. Supporters, victims of similar abuse, and women who'd followed her story waved signs that read, "Truth wins and justice for Grace." She stepped into the cold air, her breath visible, her body trembling not from fear, but from release. Julian joined her on the courthouse steps. "It's over," he said softly. Grace looked up at the falling snow. "No," she said, smiling faintly. "It's finally beginning." They walked to the waiting car as reporters called after her. "Grace, what will you do next? How does it feel to win?" She stopped for a moment, turned back toward the flashing cameras, and spoke clearly. This wasn't about winning. It was about ending the silence. That night, the news played her words across every major network. Her calm defiance went viral, shared by millions as a symbol of strength. Later, back at the penthouse, Emma climbed onto her lap, holding her snow globe. "Mommy," she asked sleepily, "is the bad man gone forever?" Grace kissed her forehead. "Yes, baby. The bad man's gone." As Emma drifted off, Julian poured 2 glasses of wine and joined her by the window. The city glittered beneath them, peaceful at last. Grace raised her glass. "To truth," she whispered. Julian smiled. "To freedom." "Ha." And as the snow continued to fall over Manhattan, Grace Turner let herself believe that the storm was truly over and that the life ahead would finally be hers to live, without fear, without apology, and without the shadow of a man who thought he could rewrite her story. The trial was over, the cameras had gone dark, and New York moved on to its next obsession. But for Grace Turner, the quiet that followed was both healing and haunting. She woke every morning to the sound of the city, the hum of traffic, the distant wail of sirens, and realized she was no longer running from anything. Yet, even in freedom, the echoes of the past lingered. She'd won the war, but the scars were still learning how to fade. A month had passed since Nathan's sentencing. His face, once plastered across every business magazine, now appeared only in occasional headlines about corporate restructuring and prison transfers. His empire had been dismantled piece by piece, sold off to pay legal fees and restitution. The man who once owned skyscrapers now lived behind iron bars. Grace's phone vibrated constantly with new opportunities. Talk shows, memoirs, podcasts. Even a studio wanted to adapt her story for television. Each offer promised millions, but each one asked her to relive the pain she'd finally escaped. Julian encouraged her to choose carefully. "You don't owe anyone your trauma," he told her one evening as they sat by the window of his penthouse, watching the Manhattan skyline. "You already told your truth. You don't need to perform it." Grace smiled faintly. "I just want to use it for something good." So, instead of signing contracts, she founded the Lily Foundation, named after Emma's middle name, a nonprofit that helped women rebuild after emotional and financial abuse. Within weeks, the foundation received overwhelming support. Donations poured in from survivors who said Grace's courage had inspired them to start again. Still, there were moments when she couldn't sleep. Sometimes she'd wake at 3 a.m., her mind replaying the years of silence, the humiliation, the fear of never being believed. She'd walk to the window, stare at the skyline, and remind herself out loud, "He's gone. You're safe. You're free." But one February night, a letter arrived that made her chest tighten. The envelope was stamped from a federal correctional facility in upstate New York. No name, but she didn't need one. She recognized the handwriting, instantly sharp, deliberate, Nathan's. Julian found her staring at it hours later. "You don't have to open it," he said quietly. Grace hesitated, then tore the seal. The letter was short, handwritten in blue ink. "Grace, I've had a lot of time to think. Maybe one day I'll understand why you did what you did. I've lost everything, but I still remember the way you looked when we first met the woman I once thought I loved. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I finally understand what it means to lose control. Nathan. Grace read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. She didn't feel anger or pity, just closure. The kind that came not from his apology, but from knowing she no longer needed one. That weekend, she spoke at a private event hosted by the Lilly Foundation. Women from across the country sat in the audience, some in tears, others in quiet strength. Grace took the stage, her voice calm but resolute. "Freedom doesn't erase pain," she said. "It teaches you what pain can't take away: your voice, your dignity, your worth. For years, I believed silence was safety. I was wrong. Speaking up didn't destroy me. It saved me." The crowd rose in applause, some standing, some weeping. Later that night, as she tucked Emma into bed, the little girl whispered, "Mommy, are we happy now?" Grace smiled, brushing back her daughter's hair. "We're learning to be, and that's more than enough." When Emma fell asleep, Grace stood by the window again. Snow drifted softly outside, catching the city lights. Julian wrapped his arms around her. "You know," he said, "most people think victory looks loud, but yours, it's quiet, peaceful." Grace leaned into him, her voice almost a whisper. "Maybe that's the only kind that lasts." And as the city pulsed below, Grace Turner finally understood the price of freedom and why it had been worth every tear, every fight, every sleepless night. Spring crept slowly into New York. The snow melted, revealing the city's pulse again: street vendors, yellow cabs, the familiar chaos of life resuming. For Grace Turner, it was the first season that didn't smell like survival. It smelled like beginning. 3 months had passed since Nathan's sentencing. The world had moved on, but Grace's story continued to ripple in quiet corners. Women she'd never met sent handwritten letters to the Lilly Foundation, sharing stories of fear, escape, and rebirth. Grace read every one. Some broke her heart. Others stitched it back together. One morning, she sat at her office window, sunlight washing over her desk. On it sat a photograph: her, Emma, and Julian standing outside the Foundation's new community center in Brooklyn. A ribbon-cutting ceremony, small but symbolic. Behind them, a sign read, "Your voice, your future, your freedom." Julian entered, carrying 2 coffees. "You've been reading letters all morning," he said. "You should eat something before you turn into caffeine and compassion." Grace smiled. "I'm fine. You know, sometimes I wonder why they trust me. I'm not a therapist or a politician." Julian sat across from her. "They trust you because you lived it and didn't let it destroy you." She looked down, fiddling with a pen. "It almost did." He reached out, touching her hand gently. "Almost isn't forever." Before she could reply, her assistant knocked. "Miss Turner, you might want to see this." She handed Grace a tablet showing a live interview on morning TV. The headline read, "Nathan Cole speaks from prison." Grace's stomach dropped. She hadn't expected him to disappear quietly, but not this soon. The screen flickered to Nathan sitting in a sterile visitation room, wearing an orange jumpsuit, but still performing for the camera like he was on a red carpet. His tone was calm, almost practiced. "I've made peace with what happened," he said. "I accept responsibility. But I also believe redemption isn't just for saints. I hope Grace finds it in her heart to forgive me." Julian muttered. "He's using guilt as marketing." "Levin." Grace watched in silence. Nathan continued, "We were both victims of a system that rewards pain. I want to spend my time helping others understand that even monsters can learn to be human again." The interviewer smiled softly. "So, you're saying you were misunderstood?" Nathan tilted his head, eyes gleaming. "Aren't we all?" Grace turned off the tablet. Her reflection on the dark screen looked calm, but her hands trembled slightly. "He hasn't changed. He's rebranding." "No." Julian's expression hardened. "Let the world see what we already know. He can't rewrite the ending this time." Later that evening, Grace sat with Elena Morales at the Lilly Foundation's event. The crowd was filled with donors, journalists, and survivors. Elena leaned over and whispered, "They're calling your story the turning point. Women are leaving bad marriages because of you." Grace's heart clenched. "I didn't do this for fame. I just wanted one less woman to feel alone." "Hi." Elena smiled. "Then you've already succeeded." When Grace took the stage, the crowd fell silent. She spoke not as a victim, but as a builder of futures. Forgiveness, she said, isn't about erasing what someone did. It's about freeing yourself from their grip. I don't hate Nathan, but I also don't owe him peace. I've given enough of my life to his story. Now, I'm writing my own. Applause thundered through the hall. Cameras flashed not with intrusion, but with admiration. Afterward, as she and Julian walked through the city, he said softly, "He can talk about redemption all he wants, but you're the one who found it." Grace looked up at the night sky, stars faint above Manhattan's glow. Redemption isn't about saving him. It's about saving myself and making sure no one else gets lost the way I did. Julian slipped his hand into hers. Then let's keep building a world where women don't have to be brave just to be safe. Grace smiled, her heart finally quiet. Now that's a story worth telling. By early summer, New York had transformed. The gray chill of winter was replaced with heat, color, and life spilling onto every street corner. For Grace Turner, it was the first time the city didn't feel like a battlefield, it felt like home. 3 months after Nathan's televised redemption stunt, the world had already forgotten him. The media cycle spun forward. His book deal collapsed, his forgiveness campaign fizzled, and the few supporters who still believed in him faded into silence. Grace didn't need to fight anymore. The truth had already won. The Lilly Foundation was thriving. Every week, new women came through the doors of its Brooklyn office, some scared, some determined, all searching for hope. Grace greeted each one personally. She didn't just see their faces. She saw pieces of her past reflected in them. One June morning, she was hosting a workshop on rebuilding financial independence when Emma burst into her office, holding a flyer. "Mommy, guess what? They picked me for the summer art show." Grace's eyes widened. "Really? That's amazing, honey." Emma nodded proudly. "My painting is called The Safe House. It's a house made of hearts." Grace smiled, her chest tightening with emotion. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." Julian appeared in the doorway, grinning. "Looks like someone inherited her mother's talent for rebuilding homes." Grace laughed softly. And hearts. Life had settled into a rhythm: work, home, healing. Yet one evening, as Grace was locking up the office, she noticed a figure waiting outside by the lamppost. A woman, mid-40s, wearing a dark coat and sunglasses. She stepped forward hesitantly. "Miss Turner." Grace nodded carefully. "Yes." The woman removed her glasses, revealing tired eyes. "My name's Clara. I used to work for Nathan Cole in accounting." Grace froze. "Why are you here?" Clara swallowed hard. "I couldn't speak during the trial. I was scared. But I kept copies of everything: emails, offshore accounts, names. He wasn't just laundering money for himself. He was helping others hide theirs too. Politicians, executives, big ones." Julian, who had followed Grace out, stiffened. "You're saying there's more corruption linked to him?" Clara nodded. "He called it the network. He said it would protect him if he ever fell." Grace exchanged a glance with Julian. "Why are you coming forward now?" Clara's voice shook. "Because I saw what you did. You made people believe they could fight back. I don't want to live afraid anymore." Grace placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then you're safe now. We'll help you." Over the next week, Grace and Julian worked with Elena Morales to submit Clara's evidence to federal investigators. The files were massive: hundreds of transactions connecting Nathan's company to a larger ring of white-collar crimes. The news broke like wildfire. New criminal network uncovered Nathan Cole at center of massive financial web. Even from prison, his name still had power, but now it was poison. Julian turned to Grace after the story aired. "Looks like his empire wasn't done collapsing after all." Grace sighed. "Evil has roots, Julian. We just pulled another one out." Len. That night, Grace tucked Emma into bed. The little girl looked up sleepily. "Mommy, why do bad people keep doing bad things?" Grace smiled softly. "Because they think no one will stop them. But someone always does." Emma yawned. "Like you?" Grace kissed her forehead. "Like all of us, baby." Later, as she stood on the balcony, Julian joined her with 2 glasses of wine. "You realize this means you're going to be in the news again?" Grace chuckled. "I'm used to it, as long as it's for the truth." He studied her face under the city's golden lights. "You've changed everything, Grace. For yourself. For her. For them. She looked at the skyline, feeling the weight of everything she'd survived and everything still ahead. Maybe. But the real change, she said quietly, is that this time I'm not surviving. I'm living. Julian smiled, clinking his glass against hers. To second chances. Grace raised hers. To new beginnings. Now. And as the summer breeze swept through Manhattan, carrying laughter and light instead of fear, Grace Turner finally realized her story was no longer about what she'd lost. It was about what she'd rebuilt. By August, New York simmered under its humid sky. The city pulsed with the rhythm of tourists and street vendors, but for Grace Turner, the heat carried an undercurrent of tension. The federal investigation into the network, the sprawling web Nathan Cole had left behind, had exploded into a full-blown scandal. Every week, another name surfaced. Politicians, CEOs, philanthropists. Nathan's rot had spread farther than anyone had imagined. And once again, Grace's face was everywhere. She hadn't asked to be the center of it, but the media called her the woman who started the storm. TV anchors dissected her interviews, podcasts analyzed her voice, and social media turned her into both saint and symbol. The pressure was suffocating, Julian noticed before she did. "You're exhausted," he said one night as she sat in their apartment, scrolling through a new wave of headlines. "You can't carry the world on your back forever." Grace sighed. "I didn't ask to carry it. I just wanted to live my life." He set down 2 glasses of wine and sat beside her. "Then let's do that. Let the system handle the rest." But Grace couldn't. Not yet. That weekend, she was invited to speak at Columbia University, her old college. The same halls where she'd once met Julian, back when they were young and naive, and life hadn't yet drawn blood. The auditorium was packed with students, professors, and cameras. The topic, Truth and Power in Modern Media. As she stepped on stage, Grace felt her heart stutter. This was where everything had begun: her career, her marriage, her belief in good intentions. She took a deep breath. "When I was your age," she began, "I thought truth was something you could hold. A story you could write neatly, with a hero and a villain. But truth isn't clean, it's messy. It costs you things: your peace, your comfort, sometimes your reputation. But it's the only thing worth fighting for." She paused. "And if you ever find yourself standing alone, with no one believing you, stand anyway, because silence only protects the powerful." Applause thundered through the hall. But as she stepped backstage, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You think the story's over? You have no idea what's coming." Her pulse quickened. She showed Julian, who frowned. "We'll trace it," he said immediately. 2 days later, the source was found: an untraceable burner phone mailed from a correctional facility upstate. Nathan. Again. The letter accompanying it was cryptic. "The network doesn't die. It adapts. You've just made it angry." Elena Morales called that night. Federal agents confirmed activity: money transfers from offshore accounts tied to Cole Media still moving. "Whoever was behind Nathan is trying to erase the trail." Grace felt a chill. "So it's not over?" "No," Elena said grimly. "But this time, they're the ones running scared." Over the next few weeks, federal raids swept across multiple states. High-profile arrests dominated the headlines. Grace refused interviews, focusing instead on the women her foundation supported. But late one night, she sat on the balcony, the city glowing below, and whispered, "He was right about one thing. Evil adapts." Julian joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "So does good," he said softly. "That's why it wins." "No." Grace leaned into him. "Do you ever think we'll stop fighting?" Julian smiled faintly. "No. But maybe that's what makes life worth living: the fight for something better." The next morning, Emma burst into their room holding a newspaper. "Mommy, look." The front page read, "Cole Network, dismantled, investigation complete." Grace took the paper, her eyes scanning the words, her breath trembling. For the first time in years, the story didn't end in fear. It ended in finality. Julian watched her, smiling. "So, what now?" Grace looked out the window, sunlight spilling across her face. "Now," she said quietly, "we rebuild everything they tried to burn, and somewhere deep inside, Grace knew every scar she'd earned had turned into armor. Every wound had become a flame. She had survived the fire. Now, she was the phoenix. Autumn painted New York in gold. The air was crisp, the streets alive again. And the city that had once been Grace Turner's prison now felt like her kingdom. The storm was finally over. The trials had ended, the scandals had burned out, and the Lilly Foundation had grown into a national movement. But most importantly, she was at peace. One Saturday morning, she stood in the kitchen of her brownstone apartment in Brooklyn sunlight, spilling across marble countertops, the smell of coffee and pancakes filling the air. Emma sat at the table, coloring, while Julian flipped pancakes in a skillet, humming off-key to some Sinatra tune. Grace leaned against the counter, smiling. "You realize you're terrible at that song, right?" Julian turned, pretending to be offended. "Hey, this voice built a career in college karaoke competitions." Emma giggled. "Mommy's better." Grace laughed, ruffling her daughter's hair. "Always take her side, huh?" Julian winked. "Smart girl. La." It was the kind of morning she used to dream about, the quiet kind, untouched by fear or cameras or the ghosts of her past. She'd thought peace would feel like silence, but it didn't. It felt like laughter. It felt like home. Later that day, Grace attended the grand opening of the Lilly Center for Empowerment, a new branch of her foundation located in Midtown Manhattan. Women filled the space: survivors, mentors, volunteers. A mural painted across the lobby wall read, "From broken to brave, mine." As she stepped up to the podium, cameras flashed, but this time she didn't flinch. "When I started this foundation," she began, "I thought it was about rebuilding lives. But now I know it's about remembering we were whole all along. We just needed someone to remind us." Applause swelled. In the front row, Julian smiled proudly, Emma perched beside him swinging her feet. Grace continued, her voice steady. "I once believed power belonged to those who could take it. Now I know it belongs to those who refuse to give up." After the ceremony, a young woman approached her with trembling hands. "Miss Turner," she said softly, "you don't know me, but I was in a situation like yours. Watching you fight made me brave enough to leave. You saved my life." Grace's eyes filled with tears. She took the woman's hands and whispered, "You saved your own. I just reminded you that you could." That evening, as twilight fell, Grace, Julian, and Emma walked along the East River. The skyline shimmered, and the water reflected the city lights like a living painting. Emma skipped ahead, chasing the reflection of stars. Julian slipped his arm around Grace. "Do you ever miss who you were before all this?" Grace thought for a moment. "No," she said finally. "I miss who I could have been if I hadn't been afraid. But now, I'm her." Julian smiled. "You always were." 1. They stopped at a small pier, where the air smelled faintly of salt and wind. Grace looked out across the river, the city glowing behind her, the horizon stretching wide and free. For a long time, she'd imagined closure as a door slamming shut. But standing there, she realized it was something gentler, a door opening, the world waiting beyond it. Emma ran back, breathless. "Mommy, look." She pointed upward. A single shooting star cut through the dark. Grace laughed softly. "Make a wish, sweetheart." Emma closed her eyes tight. "I wish we stay happy forever." Julian chuckled. "That's a big wish." Grace smiled at both of them. "No," she said, wrapping her arms around them. "That's the right one." As the star faded into the night, Grace whispered a final prayer of gratitude to the pain that had taught her strength, to the love that had rebuilt her, and to the truth that had finally set her free. The city's lights shimmered, endless and alive, and for the first time in her life, Grace Turner didn't feel like she was surviving a story. She was living one. So, that's how the story ends. What a journey, right? If you're still here with us right now, it means something in Grace's story touched your heart, maybe because, deep down, we've all been there. We've all faced moments when life tried to break us, when truth felt heavy, and when silence seemed safer than speaking up. But like Grace, we learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means becoming. The Stoics used to say, "What stands in the way becomes the way." Marcus Aurelius reminded us that every obstacle can be turned into strength. Grace's story is living proof of that pain can become purpose, and survival can become rebirth. No matter how dark things get, you always have the power to rise, to rebuild, to start again. So, my friend, if this story stirred something inside you, don't let it fade away. Let it remind you that your voice matters, your truth matters, you matter. If you felt even a spark of courage, hope, or healing from Grace's journey, please like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to our channel. Because together, we can keep turning pain into power one story at a time.